Welcome to Fireside Chat, a devotional that takes place in the Fireside Room at Falls City First United Methodist Church in Falls City, Nebraska. This devotional follows the Revised Common Lectionary, a 3-year devotional tool which gives 4 scriptures each week. If you read all 4 scriptures each week, over the course of the 3 years, you will have read a vast majority of the Bible. Each week we will read the scriptures, and Pastor will give his first thoughts upon reading the scriptures, as well as any other interesting information there is for the week. We thank you for joining us, and we hope you find something meaningful and powerful in today's devotion. Each week I read from the Common English Bible, a recent translation by multiple Protestant denominations, including the United Methodist Church. Welcome in for the 8th Sunday after Pentecost. July 31st is the Sunday. Once again, I'm having to record this a week early due to my schedules, so the camera still is not fixed because it's the same day I was recording last week, so we will once again be without video. Hopefully that gets fixed before the next one would be being read and being filmed, but we'll see what happens there. This Sunday would continue to be green, as it will for quite some time. Were there a picture, there would be green next to the fire. The readings for today, the Old Testament reading is Hosea chapter 11, verses 1 through 11. And this particular reading is more safe for work than last week's reading, but it is still Hosea, so it is Hosea is a prophet who spoke harsh words and difficult words to the people, but I think there is some good news in this passage. The song reading is Psalm 107, verses 1 through 9 and 43, and this is in the hymnal as number 830. The New Testament reading is Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 11. And then the Gospel reading is Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. The Old Testament reading is Hosea chapter 11, verses 1 through 11. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the further they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals, and they burned incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with bands of human kindness, with cords of love. I treated them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. They will return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria will be their king, because they have refused to return to me. The sword will strike wildly in their cities. It will consume the bars of their gates and will take everything because of their schemes. My people are bent on turning away from me, and though they cry out to the Most High, he will not raise them up. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim? My heart winces within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I won't act on the heat of my anger. I won't return to destroy Ephraim. For I am God and not a human being, the Holy One in your midst. I won't come in harsh judgment. They will walk after the Lord, who roars like a lion. When he roars, his children will come trembling from the west. They will come trembling like a bird, like a dove from the land of Assyria, and I will return them to their homes, says the Lord. So once again, with the book of Hosea, we see difficult prophecy. In this one, God kind of justifies God's actions as just. That I've reached out and I've loved the people of Israel and I've tried everything. I just cannot get to them. They no matter what I do, they run away and they will return to the land of Egypt. In other words, they will return to a period of slavery. They will return to a period of being subordinate and second-class citizens, this time in Assyria instead of Egypt. Assyria will be their king. And they will do it because they refuse to listen to me. Every time I go to them, they run further away from me. And God here declares that it hurts. That God's heart is shattering, right? But God's not acting out of anger. God is just simply, letting them finally make the choice they have wanted to make forever. And he doesn't want to. He's asking, how can I give you up, Ephraim? Right? How can I hand you over, Israel? How can I make you like them. How can I do this? But he kind of has to, right? Eventually, there's only so often that you can save someone and get no thanks from it, and if anything, have them go run off to somebody else. There's only so often before you just have to let them go, and I think that there's always throughout Hosea the end of each message is this hope that some of them will return, that it will come back. Um, and you come trembling like a bird, this one says, like a dove from the land of Assyria, and that God will be able to return them to their homes, that eventually they'll come back. Um, and we see in the southern kingdom of Judah, when they're conquered by Babylon, they're allowed to stay together. We see that the Babylonian exiles do come back. We see that the people of Judah do come back. Um, but of course, the kingdom of Israel is assimilated into the Assyrian Empire, and I assume that there are many descendants of those 10 tribes that are now Christian, or maybe even some that have gone back and converted back to Judaism, but they don't know that they're a member of those 10 tribes because those tribes have been lost. So I assume that there are many who have come back over the years, but not by name and not by the kingdom of Israel, because the current Jews, the current Israelites, those that are citizens of the kingdom of Israel right now, are all descendants of those who were in the southern kingdom. And so we as I look back with history, to look back at this group, it my feelings as I read this are with God, um, and hopefully, understanding what God is doing, and hoping that the compassion that God has shown, uh, not stopping even at this moment, right? The compassion that God has shown continuing throughout history, even through till today, and will continue to show in the future, has indeed brought some back. But that's all we can do, and is love and show grace, and eventually let people go, um, and eventually people will make their own minds, whether they're coming with your invitation to church, or whether they don't, or whether they believe or whether they don't believe, or whether they go this way or whether they go that way. People will make up their own minds, and all we can do is show them love and compassion. And if they wind up back in Egypt, they wind up back in Egypt. But if they wind up coming back here, we will home them and love them. So that's what I think of, and think too when I read this passage. The song reading is Psalm 107, verses 1 through 9, and then the last verse, 43. Give thanks to the Lord because he is good, because his faithful love lasts forever. That's what those who are redeemed by the Lord say. The ones God redeemed from the power of their enemies, the ones God gathered from various countries, from east and west, north and south. Some of the redeemed had wandered into the desert, into the wasteland. They couldn't find their way to a city or a town. They were hungry and thirsty. Their lives were slipping away. So they cried out to the Lord in their distress, and God delivered them from their desperate circumstances. God led them straight to human habitation. God let them thank the Lord for his faithful love and his wondrous works for all people. Because God satisfied the one who was parched with thirst, and he filled up the hungry with good things. Whoever is wise will pay attention to these things, carefully considering the Lord's faithful love. This is a psalm of praise and great praise. The story of this psalm, right, are those who have wandered into the desert and they couldn't find their way to a city or a town, hungry and thirsty, and they cry out to the Lord, and God delivers them and leads them straight to human habitation. So, this is the people who have found themselves in times of crisis, and in the midst of crisis, they cry out to God, and God delivers them. And here, this is, in some sense, this is a psalm of praise that God does this, and that God will do this for those who are in crisis, even those who have not been there, right? For a very long time, those who haven't been in church for 40 years, right? They get into crisis and they cry out to God. God is there for them, and God has compassion on them, and God gives grace to them. And sometimes, if you're in the middle of a crisis, and let's say a medical crisis or something like that, sometimes God doesn't deliver us in the way of healing, or in the way of saving our life from whatever is coming. But that doesn't mean that God isn't there, and that doesn't mean that God doesn't save us in blessings, and save our souls, and bring to us a kind of compassion and love and peace that we wouldn't necessarily have had we not turned back. And so, This is just a great psalm of praise that God is there for us and will bless us and has a wonderful and steadfast love that endures forever. The epistle reading is from the book of Colossians, chapter 3, verses 1 through 11. Therefore, if you were raised with Christ, look for the things that are above, where Christ is sitting at God's right side. Think about the things above and not the things on earth. You died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory. So put to death the parts of your life that belong to the earth, such as sexual immorality, moral corruption, lust, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. The wrath of God is coming upon disobedient people because of these things. You used to live this way when you were alive to these things. But now set aside these things, such as anger, rage, malice, slander, or obscure language. Don't lie to each other. Take off the old human nature with its practices and put on the new nature, which is renewed in knowledge by conforming to the image of the one who created it. In this image there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised nor uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave nor free, but Christ is all things and in all people. So obviously there's a great deal here to talk about and a great deal here to remember, uh, and several things that are rather famous. Verses and rather famous ideas from the list of sins up in verse 5, really, because that's the one that people usually focus in on. But don't forget verse 8 as well. Anger, rage, malice, slander, and obscene language being another list of sins there. And please don't forget the entirety of the top one. um, it's not just sexual immorality and then there's a period, right? There's after that, there's moral corruption, lust, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. And I think that many of us struggle at the very least. Maybe we don't commit these every day, but we struggle with at least one of those, right? And I think greed being the most common, greed or anger being the most common. For all of those, and we struggle with these. And so it's worth remembering back that God's anger it can be brought away, and God forgives, and that God's steadfast love endures forever, and that God calls us back. But we struggle with those, so it's important to remember to go through all of those. And then, of course, the bottom one, to remember that within the body of Christ, at the very least, if not in the whole world, that these things that we've used to divide each other, in those day and age, right? Greek and Jew, and circumcised or uncircumcised, in other words, Gentile or Jew, these are things that were used to divide each other in the church. And Paul is saying here, no, there is no division. Barbarian and Scythian, Roman and non-Roman, slave nor free, right? Slave and free being things that were used to divide each other. That Paul says Christ is in all things and in all people. And of course, you could safely, I think, update that to any kind of thing that we use now to divide each other, right? Republican, Democrat, red state, blue state, male, female, all these things that we work on to divide each other now. Paul, I think, could easily be paraphrased to say no, that all of these things are indeed um, brought low and removed. These divisions are removed. That Christ is in all of us, and in all things and in all people, and that we do well to avoid some of those sins that were listed above toward those people, because we have to remember that when we're angry with this person, that Christ is with this person. When when we slander, or when we have obscene language, or when we have rage, or when we have malice, that whatever that's directed at, Christ is present in that, and we have to remember that. And that's what I believe Paul is calling us to remember here at this point. Finally, our gospel reading is Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. The heading on this is a warning against greed. Someone from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus said to him, "Man, who appointed me as judge or referee between you and your brother?" Then Jesus said to them, "Watch out. Guard yourself against all kinds of greed. After all, one's life isn't determined by one's possessions, even when someone is very wealthy." Then he told them a parable. A certain rich man's land produced a bountiful crop. He said to himself, "What will I do? I have no place to store my harvest." Then he thought, Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. That's where I'll store all my grain and my goods. I'll say to myself, you have stored up plenty of goods, even for enough for several years. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourself. But God said to him, Fool, tonight you will die. Now who will get the things you have prepared for yourself? This is the way it will be for those who hoard things for themselves and aren't rich toward God. This is another famous, in my mind, parable. It's certainly one that has been instructive to me as I've gone through my life, as kind of helping. One of the things that I think we struggle with, at least that I hear quite often, is the parable of the young rich man. Uh, this is also in the Gospel of Luke, I believe, where the young man comes up and asks Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus turns back and says, "Sell all your possessions, give all the proceeds to the poor, and then you can come follow me." And of course, the man doesn't do that. And so for a lot of people, particularly those who are focused on taking the Bible, seriously and taking it literally, um, they struggle with that because that's the thing is like, well, is Jesus asking everyone to do that? Is Jesus asking everyone to give up all their possessions, sell it all, give all the proceeds to the poor, and then come follow him? And of course, the answer to that is no. At least not, at least I don't think in this day and age, certainly. And so what we see in this passage is, I think, more what Jesus is in line with. And if I think back to last week, we talked about the Lord's Prayer. And in the Lord's Prayer, it says, give us this day our daily bread. And that there's an emphasis and a focus there um, on the dailiness of it, right? That give us what we need to survive today. Uh, and I think that's kind of reiterated in this parable where Jesus in this parable, Jesus says that this guy has been a good guy. This farmer has been a good farmer, and that he's you know that there's nothing wrong with where he's been, and he gets a bountiful crop, right? He's blessed. He's um, blessed with this bountiful crop that is producing beyond his wildest imaginations. And now he's got to decide what to do with it. And where Jesus begins to criticize the man in the parable, at least, is when the man says, "Well, then I'll just build a bigger barn. Right? I'm going to tear down the barn I've got, which has been fine to serve his family and his needs for however long it's been up. Right? That's been fine. Well, I have more grain now than I can put in this barn, so I'm going to tear this one down. I'm going to build a bigger barn so that I can store all my grain out. Right? And then worth noting that greed often leads to the sin of sloth. Right. Um, well, I'll tear down my barn and then I'll tell myself, you've stored up plenty of goods, enough for several years. Take it easy, right? Drink and enjoy and enjoy yourself. What I think Jesus is indicating here, and where that line goes, where does it become greed? Uh, this man has a barn, and everything's been fine, and everything is stored up fine, and filling up that barn is enough to feed his family for a year, maybe a little bit more, right? I assume he hasn't filled the barn every year. And so, filling up that barn is plenty of food for him. But now he has extra left over. And what Jesus is saying is, and I believe expects the people and his people to do, is once you have enough, right? Once you have your daily bread or your yearly grain or whatever you need for what you have right now, once you have enough to satisfy your needs, that you're not going to be in the poorhouse, right? That you're going to have a roof over your head, you're going to have a food on food on the table. Once you have that, you stop storing, right? That in our case, you probably can build up a 401k for there will be retirement age to be considering, right? But you don't need a billion, right? You probably don't even need a million. Certainly in a bank on an average regular day. That there comes a time when you have enough, and when you have enough, you need to recognize that and start to give the excess to those around you, to those who don't have enough. That in some sense, God begins to use you as the answer to the prayer of "Give us this day our daily bread" for somebody else, and that is what God is expecting, or at least Jesus is expecting of this particular farmer who has received this bountiful harvest. Is that yeah, you're gonna keep what you need to survive, what you need for the year, maybe a little bit of a buffer in case next year doesn't have a great crop. But then after that, you need to be giving the rest to those who didn't get a bountiful crop, and ensuring that is there. Don't keep it for yourself. Use it for the kingdom and use it for the people around you and for the community. And I think that is where we have that line, and what is greed and what is not greed. Um, it is not greedy to make sure that you can live for whatever time you need until the next paycheck. So, I know for farmers that could be, a year, right? Or whatever you need for the next paycheck, cool. But until then, but after that, that you're not called to build a bigger barn. You're called to spread the wealth and ensure that to use the biblical language, right? To ensure that the widows and the orphans and the immigrants among us, right? Those that are the least of these in Matthew 25, to ensure that they have food to eat as well. That's what we're called to do, and that's what it means to not be greedy. And I think it's important to remember that as a key and important message, um, and to remember that greed is a sin, and to be giving. Um, but we're called to be giving away our excess, and that's something that is very important to remember in Christianity. Thank you for watching this devotion all the way through to this point. My hope and my prayer is that you have gathered something from this, and that that God has spoken to you at some point during this. If God has spoken to you, if you have gotten something from this devotion, please do comment down below. It really does help this devotion be seen by as many people as possible. Please do react on Facebook or YouTube. Comment down below and let me know what spoke to you and what you love about this series. As always, thank you for watching, and may God be with you until we meet again.